I hereby call to order the special meeting of the Palm Springs City Council for October 4th, 2018. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Please place your hand over your heart and join me in our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. City Clerk, would you please do a roll call?
Councilmember Holstedge.
Present.
Councilmember Coors.
Present.
Councilmember Middleton.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Present.
Mayor Moon.
Present.
All members are present.
Thank you very much. The first item is public comment for unfinished business items only, which is the subject of tonight's agenda. 2 minutes will be assigned to each speaker. Speakers? Do we have any speakers? Anyone? Oh, there they are. Okay. Okay, our first speaker will be Christine Hammond, followed by Les Sundel, then Peter Maeda, and then David Friedman. It's on.
Okay, thank you. Hi, you guys have been busy. So I just wanted to say that I agree with and support the 5-district model for council members that includes a rotating mayor as the model that best serves the residents of Palm Springs. This concept has the potential of leveling the field so any resident seemingly interested in serving our community can run a campaign for city council, not just those with very serious financial resources to take on what is now an insane amount of money for a city council campaign and even more to run a mayoral campaign. Currently, the mayor presides over council meetings, signs proclamations, and makes appearances in addition to city council duties, committees, that sort of thing. That means this position essentially does everything that a council position does. And when the mayor isn't available to attend events, cut ribbons, what happens? A council member goes and does it. So I think there's been the sharing of responsibility among council members and mayor for a long, long time, and this would acknowledge that set of duties. We generally haven't, no, let me start over on that one. We have intelligent people on city council. Of course, each and every council member can perform or learn to perform the role of mayor. Even as a book begins with chapter 1, an elected mayor begins at the first council meeting, learning from city staff and other council members how to run the meeting and how to operate the technology.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. Your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Next speaker
I support the
next
5
speaker
district.
is Les Sundel, followed by Peter Maeda, then David Friedman, then Mark Marshall.
Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. My name is Les Sundel. I'm a resident of Palm Springs. I happen also to be the president of Desert Healthcare District, who went through a similar thing of dividing into zones. We unfortunately didn't have the luxury of the time that you've had. I have to congratulate you on the process that you used and the work of the community work group, who I agree with their recommendations. The problem with a citywide elected mayor is that it gives residents the mistaken impression that either the mayor is the CEO of the city, which the mayor is not, or that the mayor has additional decision-making authority different than other city council members. I read on Facebook this morning, and I admit that I read Facebook too much, somebody said, I fought for the United States government, and I do not want to give up my right to vote for the mayor of the city of Palm Springs. Again, you know, they're sort of comparing it to President of the United States or a chief executive officer of a city, and that's not what the position is. Districts allow for less expensive campaigns, as has been suggested, and greater representation of the diversity of the city on the council. Now, notice I said the diversity of people, not necessarily the diversity of ideas. Because one of the cautions I would have is that when somebody is elected by a district, they reflect the people that live in that district, but they don't just represent the district. We have to come up with a way, and it may be difficult, but we have to impress upon the citizens and anyone elected to the city council that at all times they represent the entire city, not just the district from where they were elected. It's important that the people feel that they know the person and that the person looks like them or lives around them, experiences the things they're experiencing. But the city council member represents the whole city.
Thank you, Dr. Sundel. Next speaker is Peter Maeda, then David Friedman, then Mark Marshall, and Ed Dietrich.
Mr. Mayor, could I just ask to allow for our Spanish interpreter to make an announcement that she's available?
Sure.
Just 1 second, sir.
Here to interpret into Spanish for the community, and someday we see many of them. But it's my sincere hope that we can bring them in.
Can you say it in Spanish, please?
Sí, por supuesto. Me perdonan. Okay. Estoy aquí para traducir o para interpretar a las personas de habla hispana y espero muy sinceramente que algún día podamos tener bastantes personas participando.
Okay, our next speaker is Peter Maeda, then David Friedman, then Mark Marshall, and Ed Dietrich, then Grace Garner.
Good evening. My name is Peter Maeda. The public meetings you've held to educate residents and solicit input for districting were enormously helpful to me in understanding the need and the mechanics of this transition. Because of these public meetings, I'm now considering a run for a district seat in the next election cycle. So thank you for that. My question is, once we move to districts, it seems that council members will be expected to vie for the city's resources to satisfy the needs of their district and its constituents over the city as a whole. How will this be avoided? This has been an issue in other cities, along with horse trading of votes. What provisions have you made to ensure that no district receives more than its share of the city's resources to the exclusion of another district? And I have a second question for you. What will happen if someone runs for one of the districts where Christy or Lisa currently reside and subsequently wins that district seat in the next election while Christy and Lisa are still seated? What happens if Christy and Lisa were to then run again for, in their districts, again in their current districts? Since whoever wins the district seat in the next election cycle would then be the seated council member for the same district, would they potentially be ineligible to run again, at least in the district in which they reside? Or would the districts they both reside in not be a part of the next election cycle? What provisions have you made to address this issue? Anyway, I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to your deliberations and responses to these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maeda. Next is David Friedman, then Mark Marshall, Ed Dietrich, and Grace Garner, then Dixie Miller.
Good evening, Mayor Moon, Mayor Pro Tem Roberts, and council members. My name is David Friedman. First, I would like to thank the members of the CVRA Community Working Group for all the work they have done in community outreach and their thorough report. As someone who also devotes large amounts of time to make Palm Springs a better place, I greatly appreciate their dedication to this critical issue for the city's future. Second, I would like to express my strong support of the recommendation of the working group and the council subcommittee that the city adopt a 5-by-district electoral system with a mayor selected from the city council. I fully agree with the opinion of both the city attorney and the city's outside election expert that this is the only option that protects the city from being in violation of the CVRA's prohibition of any at-large elections and insulates the city from potential litigation under the CVRA because it leaves no at-large elements. This option also squarely puts the city within the safe harbor provisions of Government Code Section 34886, which allows the city by ordinance to make changes in its electoral method that satisfy the purposes of the CVRA. In addition to strictly legal issues, a 5-by-district electoral system satisfies the goals adopted by Council in May by maximizing the goals of the CVRA and prioritizing the creation of majority-minority districts. Each district is by nature more compact in both its geographical size and total population, facilitating the electoral campaign. It is also entirely possible, as shown in the 5-district map that I submitted, to satisfy Council's goal to keep the organized neighborhoods intact. For the reasons stated above, in the report of the working group and the subcommittee's comments in the staff report for this evening, I urge the Council to adopt the recommendation of the working group and the Council subcommittee. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Our next speaker is Mark Marshall, followed by Ed Dietrich, then Grace Garner, then Dixie Miller.
Mr. Mayor, council members, my name is Mark Marshall, and I just wanted to follow up. I have to tell you that I really struggled with this, thinking about, do we need a mayor for the whole city? And I was actually for that to begin with. But once I started seeing the materials that I think came out of your study groups and what has been made available to us, I see the advantages. Many have already been stated, but I think the two that matter to me the most is elections have gotten out of hand financially, and I actually see this as helping bring that cost down. I think having 5 will also give us a better representation because you've got more groups that you can diversify. What I would ask is that you preserve as best you can the already recognized neighborhoods instead of like splitting a neighborhood in half in one district. When I try that, I tried to do that online and I couldn't quite get that worked out to come up with my own recommendation. With that said, I have to tell you I support the smoke tree, mainly because I look at it and it's more cohesive versus what looks like gerrymandering on some of the others, just so you get the numbers right. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Next speaker is Ed Dietrich, followed by Grace Garner, then Dixie Miller, then Alexis Ortega.
Good evening, Council. I want to support, I just did, support folks who've already preceded me up here with what they've stated. I think the thing for me is to keep it as simple as possible and as least expensive as possible. And I think the recommendation of the committee is just perfect for our needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dietrich. Next speaker is Grace Garner, followed by Dixie Miller, then Alexis Ortega, then Kathy Wermuck.
Good evening. My name is Grace Garner. I am a resident of Palm Springs, a member of the working group, and I was also born and raised here. I'm very proud to have been a member of the working group. I feel that the work that we did is good. And I think the 5-district model is the model that is most equitable and will provide the most opportunity for Palm Springs residents. I would love to see a council that reflects all of Palm Springs in so many different ways, and geographically would be a huge step, and hopefully we'll see other diversity measures as well. I also agree that having the mayor rotated or selected by council will also give a little more representation to our residents so that each person can feel like their community and their area has a voice at different times. So thank you very much for your consideration of the 5 districts, and I hope that you will adopt it.
Thank you, Ms. Garner. Administrative note, if someone finishes early and I reset the system, I don't push the start button until they start speaking so they don't lose any time. That's why sometimes you hear the little thing go off after they've started, because I'm giving them a few extra seconds because I want to make sure we don't shortchange anybody.
Good evening. I'm Dixie Miller, and I'm from the Desert Highland Gateway community. And we submitted 7 maps supporting and endorsing the 5 districts. We feel that it gives us a better playing ground as far as getting someone in our district elected, as far as cost. And we just feel we're encouraged to know that if a 5 district is elected, that we have a chance to somebody in our neighborhood to represent Palm Springs on the council. and as far as money, especially the money part. So I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Next speaker is Alexis Ortega, then Kathy Warmuck, then Stephen Moses, then Ed Dubé.
Good evening, Council. My name is Alexis Ortega. I'm one of the co-chairs of the CVRA Working Group. I was born and raised in Palm Springs, and I too obviously support the recommendations of the Working Group for 5 districts with the mayor position elected or selected by council. I think it's the most equitable way to go. I think it pushes Palm Springs forward and more in line with our values as a progressive city. I think it can do a lot to decrease the cost of elections, and I think that it can do a lot to engage engage communities that possibly we haven't seen, and I really appreciate the sentiments of the interpreter this evening. I know for a fact that there are Spanish-speaking folks, bilingual folks, English as a second language folks who live in this city who feel like there's not a place for them. And so I hope that this process is the beginning of creating more spaces for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ortega. Next is Kathy Warmuck, then Stephen Moses, then Ed Dubé, then Tobias Wolff.
Hi, I'm Kathy Warmuck and one of the co-chairs of the CVRA Working Group. I'm obviously here to support the 5-district council-elected mayor system of government. I came to that for 2 different reasons. One is experience. I worked in and supported districts in the city of Boston and saw how it changed the city in terms of, and slowly, in terms of minority people feeling confident to run. I think currently there are 4 women of color on the Boston City Council. When districts started, there weren't any. And I don't remember there being any women either. The other is that I think it's good government. I was in Santa Monica. I was on Planning Commission for 6 years there. They had a council-elected mayor, and what I saw happened as the baton passed is that people got stronger who were on the council. We had, we basically just got a much stronger council where you could turn to any of the council people and they could provide leadership. And I think we'll see that result. I think, you know, we currently have a mayor who's doing all the ceremonial duties. It's probably hard to give that give that up, but I do think we gain something back when we have the mayor's position rotating or circulating amongst the council people. And I think that's one way of keeping a sense of the council serving the entire community and not breaking into factions, because each of them will have a role representing the entire city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Warmuck. Next speaker is Stephen Moses, then Ed Dubé, then Tobias Wolff, and our last speaker is Robert Finley. If anyone else wishes to speak, please put a card into the city clerk at this time.
Thank you for hearing me. I'm Stephen Moses. I'm Harvard Law School trained, experienced in government structure and the electoral process. My Palm Springs experience dates back to the 1960s. I'm a full-time resident, a registered voter, and I'm a member of the Redistricting Working Group. I understand that tonight you will decide whether to create 5 districts with a mayor selected periodically by the council or 4 districts with a mayor elected at large. The working group has been advised by the city attorney that the compliance with the CVRA is best achieved by the 5-district model. The working group received a great deal of input from citizens at its public neighborhood sessions. By an overwhelming majority, the public input favored the 5-district model. The working group received written input from citizens. The overwhelming majority of all those favored the 5-district model. The working group, in its written report, unanimously recommended the 5-district model. A small number of citizens suggested holding a special election to make minor adjustments in the 5 or 4 decision. A special election would be time-consuming and expensive, and more importantly, might in itself be seen in the lawsuit, the possible lawsuit, as a violation of the CVRA. I urge you as emphatically as I can to authorize the 5-district model. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moses. Next is Ed Dubé, then Tobias Wolff, then Robert Finley.
Good evening. I'm Ed Doobie, a member of the CVRA working group. 2 days ago, the Desert Sun ran a very nice op-ed on what we're considering here tonight, and the former city manager, Norm King, wrote a rebuttal for the 4 districts, and I have sent the following response in, and I'd like to read it to you. To allege that percentage differences between the best of 4 and 5 district scenarios are not significant is false. A 1% differential in a 5-district election would be 89 votes. For 4 districts, that number increases by almost 25% to 111. In the 2015 election for at-large mayor and 2 city council members for Palm Springs, the differential between the 2nd and 3rd place candidates for council in the final tally, J.R. Roberts got 4,785 votes, and Paul Lewin got 4,709 votes. That differential was only 76 votes, so every percentage matters. As we consider whether 4 or 5 districts is appropriate for Palm Springs to meet the requirements of the California Voting Rights Act, the courts have determined 2 essential demographic criteria come into play: total population per district and the citizens of voting age population by district. To satisfy CVRA requirements, each district cannot deviate from any other on the basis of the most recent census data by more than 10% in total population. However, due to a variety of non-discretionary dilution factors in demographics which impact legal ability to vote, such as children under 18 years of age, green card holders, immigration status, convicted felons still serving sentence or on parole, and limited mental competency, and individual discretion in such numbers such as voter registration and voter turnout, the courts...
Thank you, Mr. Doobie. Our next speaker is Tobias Wolff, then Robert Finley, then Naomi Soto. If anyone else wishes to speak, please put a card in at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Tobias Wolff. I'm one of the co-chairs of the working group. And I'd like to use my time today to not go over again the reasons for our recommendation, but to urge on you the importance, if you can, of reaching a unanimous decision about that recommendation. The process that this city council has initiated in response to the demand letter that it got has been remarkable. It has been a process that has not been about responding to a potential lawsuit. It has been a process about taking an opportunity to address historical inequities in the city of Palm Springs, taking an opportunity to develop relationships of trust and relationships of strong lines of communication with parts of this city that have too long felt like they didn't have that kind of relationship with this body. And initiating a process that allowed us and members of the city council and others to hear the voices of this community in an engaged process in a way that is not going to end when you all make your final decision. This process can and should be, and we believe will be, the beginning of a new way of the city and the city government and the city council communicating with all parts of this community. And doing that is going to be greatly facilitated, greatly made more productive, I think, by clear messages from this council about the values that it is seeking to advance by making the changes that it's making, and the reasons why a 5-district system best advance those values. So I encourage you to have the most vigorous debate and discussion possible when you begin discussing amongst yourselves. But I encourage you also to think about the value of not just a clear decision, but a unanimous decision. Speaking with one voice on this important civil rights issue would be a fitting testament to both the process that you all have initiated and the change in the relationship between city government and the people of Palm Springs that you are about to bring about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Wolff. Next speaker is Robert Finley, followed by Naomi Soto.
Hi, my name's Robert Finley. I'm a resident of Palm Springs. I'm not going to get into all of my feelings on the district voting issue. That would take a lot longer than 2 minutes. But I'm going to ask 2 rhetorical questions regarding choosing the mayor from amongst the council persons. 1, what would be your reaction? And just think about this. What would be your reaction if the state legislature suddenly told all the voters from California, You're not going to elect a governor anymore. You're going to elect one person to the state legislature, and then the legislature is going to decide who's going to be governor. We'll pick them from amongst our group. What would be your reaction to that? Second question, let's take it a step further. What would be your reaction if the U.S. Congress said, people, you're not going to vote for the president anymore. We don't care what you think. We are going to pick someone to be president from amongst our group. I want not only the city council to think about this, but everybody in the room and everybody who's watching this on TV. Think about what your reaction would be to that. I think this rotating mayor thing is a sack of you-know-what. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finley. The next speaker is Naomi Soto, and if no one else puts in a card, Ms. Soto will be our last speaker.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. My name is Naomi Soto. I'm a resident here in the city of Palm Springs. I'm actually not originally from the desert, but I'm an anomaly of a Latina millennial who's chosen to build her life and career here in the city. And for me, to see the city to consider to moving to 5 district is actually very empowering as a resident to recognize that the structures that are being formed are actually inclusive and reflective of the people who are living here, who have been here for generations, and also for new residents as well, to see that there's a path and that the leadership of the city reflects that. Just one comment about choosing a mayor from one of the 5 city council members. This actually does happen in a lot of other legislative bodies, and what we see actually is when the executive leadership is chosen by the kind of other legislative elected leaders. Oftentimes that top person is more people of color or women. So countries that have women prime ministers are often chosen by those bodies. So to see the potential for this long-term opportunity to see more people of color, more women, more marginalized communities in all sorts of leadership positions is an exciting moment for the city of Palm Springs. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Soto. Any other speakers, City Clerk? Seeing none, we will close public comment for the unfinished business section. Okay, next item, unfinished business. Provide direction regarding the recommendations of the California Voting Rights Act, CVRA Community Working Group related to the city's governance structure, election method, and other related matters. Discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Roberts.
Yeah, I think we need a staff report, don't we?
Honorable Mayor.
Is there a staff report?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, the City Council established the California Voting Rights Act CVRA Working Group to independently develop recommendations related to the city's governance structure and many other election-related matters. In partnership with the working group, the city has facilitated 16 engagement meetings and events in which over 400 people have attended and provided input related to the districting process. The city has received over 40 maps drawn by the city's demographer, but primarily from members of the community. On September 27th, the working group presented its recommendations to the City Council at a study session. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to receive input or receive direction regarding whether the City Council will adopt a 4-district with the mayor elected at large or a 5-district with the mayor elected from the City Council electoral system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, City Clerk. Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor, guess we're going to dive right into this. I first have to say, having spent 2 years writing policy with my colleague, Councilman Kors, on vacation rentals, I can't say that I've seen any group work as exhaustively as this group has on the CRVA group. I continue to be impressed and humbled by the amount of work that you all put in and the level of research that was clearly necessary in this. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you not only for your time to the city, but I want to thank you because I didn't have to do it. Because I'm tired just thinking about all the work that you did. So thank you. And You clearly are an amazingly intelligent group of people. Whatever you do, we want you to continue working with the city at some level. I know some of you do on a regular basis because I know your face as well, but God, the rest of you, please stay involved. We need you. For me, the question and the decision is easy. I want to go through a few things quickly. I was moved by two questions from Peter Mayetta that I think we need to respond to. And I'm looking over at staff and I throw this one in the air. What is a situation where we have two sitting council members who would potentially run again in their districts? What would happen in this next cycle? So Eddie, are you going to do that one? Or either one, Jim
sure.
or Eddie?
I'll speak to it, but I'd like special counsel to opine as well.
Well, that actually would make sense. Okay, so.
Thank you. And I'll speak first because, frankly, this is an area that is of some complexity. There are rules that apply to how the assignment or connection is made between council members and individual districts that have to do not only with California law, but with federal law. We can't and shouldn't ever, in this districting process, think about forming districts that match where the five of you live in order to keep the five of you on the council. And there's obviously good reasons for that. I'm going to punt to special counsel for more detail, but suffice it to say that once the council makes the decision that it's going to make, and the map, and that's really, frankly, the subject of two statutorily mandated public hearings, and the map that you're going to use is selected, at that point, we'll start turning toward logistics. And I guess the shorter answer to your question that I could have given, but I wanted to give the additional information, is that's not on tonight's menu.
Thank you. That doesn't answer my question. I have a very specific question that was asked by our audience. Jim, can you do that for me?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
I wanted Jim to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The phenomenon you're referring to is called pairing. That's what is called pairing.
Pairing, okay.
Pairing, like pairing two things together.
Gotcha.
And it does happen from time to time where maps are drawn, and the result is that two incumbent council members, I actually had one earlier this year where there were three that were in one specific district. It does happen. At the end of the day, as Mr. Kotkin had mentioned, I'll echo his comments, under both state and federal law, the priority in drafting those maps is in ensuring as near as possible equality of population in the districts, and then adjusting for preserving communities of interest, maintaining natural boundaries, topographical, infrastructure boundaries, those type of things. Incumbency is, by definition, not to be a factor in how you draw the maps. And so if, depending on how it all works out, and as Mr. Kotkin said, we're going to have a lot more work ahead of us as we review these maps, we'll have to see how that shakes out. But there could be pairing. We'll just have to see.
All right, so I'm sorry. I guess I didn't ask my question correctly, or more importantly, I might have misheard our speaker. My understanding of the question was simply this. Regardless of what we do with our maps, and we're not talking about that tonight, the question was simply about what will happen. So there are 3 seats coming up in November. And there are 2 council members that will remain to finish their terms. Mm-hmm. If the districts happen to be cut in such a way that one or both of them land in a district, what will then happen? Will somebody, and I may bring the speaker back up here to correct me if I didn't hear him right.
We get you.
But somebody I decide to run in the district where Lisa is currently residing, just by a fluke, because I might live in her district. In fact, I think I do. So in that case, what happens when Lisa's term is completed in 2 years? That's the question.
Understood. If you have an at-large seat that, say, is going to go, let's use the example, you have a seat that's going to go beyond 2019. Say you have a seat that's going to go to 2021.
Thank you.
But your district is going to be up in 2019 under whatever the rollout plan is. that incumbent will have a choice. That incumbent can either serve out the remaining 2.5 years of his or her term, but then we'll have to wait 2 additional years until that district seat comes back up again in 2023.
So basically, they lose their seat for a few years.
For a couple of years. The other option that I have seen some incumbents do is they resign their seat early, their at-large seat early, and actually run for that district seat.
Rerun for their seat.
Effectively rerun for their seat by resigning the at-large seat early. And then what happens is, under the vacation law, you fill that seat at large for the remaining couple of years of that seat until it transitions over to by district.
Well, Dr. Reddy, doesn't this get more intriguing by the moment? That is a great question. Yeah.
We've actually run into that a few times in some cities.
No, this hasn't come up, and it's a great question, and the answer is very interesting.
And that's why he focused on the pairing, which is really at the heart of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask a follow-up, if I may, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting because I was at the League of California Cities training, and they discussed, and I thought you said that incumbency, so someone having a seat, isn't a consideration. We're not able to consider that in mapping. But when I went to the League of California Cities training on this, they actually did say something that I was surprised by, because personally I think we should make this decision without consideration of my personal interests. It's for the city at large and the history of the city going forward. But I actually did have an expert, they said that by considering incumbency, who's in that seat now, we're respecting the vote of the people who voted those people in. So is that just for drawing maps where we aren't able to consider that?
I can't speak to what this speaker may have said at this event. What I can tell you is, under the law, these other factors take priority, and you are not supposed to consider incumbency in drawing those districts. So,
that was my understanding of it as well. I just didn't know how this all laid out for 2 that are currently seated on the council. So that's interesting and compelling, and the concept that they could vacate their seats just to hold their seats, rerun and hold their seats, is a very interesting one.
You're talking about a significant transition in the political landscape of your city, and so these type of things do happen. Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Mayor Pro Tem, I just want to inject one additional concept, and Mr. Priest will correct me if he's aware of precedent or practice that is contrary. You don't suspend common sense once the map is drawn and you're talking about which council members correspond to which districts. If it happens to be the case, once the district lines are drawn, that
I understand that. My question was not about maps. It was simple, and not about us gerrymandering maps to make them work. I don't think that was the intention of the asker, and he's shaking his head. It was very simply that if this happened to lay down where one of these council members' districts was somebody who's going to run for him, and I guess, of course they will. Somebody's going to run in every district. So I wondered how how they would deal with it. And the answer that they could potentially rerun, which the thought of rerunning your campaigns 2 years early, doesn't that sound fun? So, okay, thank you. And I didn't write down the second question. I'm going to ask, Peter, do you mind coming up and asking your second question again?
Fair share of resources. Fair share of resources.
Yeah, I want to hear his whole question again. They were both really good questions. Well, I think it was about fair share of resources.
To divide for city's resources to satisfy the needs of the district and its constituents over the city as a whole. How will this be avoided, basically?
Okay. Okay. And was there another one in there?
Just what provisions have you made to ensure that no district receives more than its share of the city's resources to the exclusion of another district?
Okay, thank you so much. So on his second questions, I think I'm going to leave those alone. I mean, from my understanding, the council will simply have to work that out. Essentially, figuring out what district's going to get what resources is going to be the subject of a lot of debate and a lot of conversations at that time.
That's going to be part of the political process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I just want to say that when I started by saying this would be an easy decision for me, it is, and I'm referring to the decision of having 5 districts over 4 and having a rotating mayor. And the 3 reasons that it makes the most sense for me is, our subcommittee pretty much proved to us that it makes better sense on many levels through their research. My understanding is that most cities in California are on a rotating mayor basis. And I think I'm the only person up here that has served as mayor in a city that had a rotating mayor, and I can tell you that it worked well. And it works well for some of the reasons that were brought up by other speakers. It simply gives each council member an opportunity to have that ceremonial seat, but even more importantly, to have the opportunity to be the speaker for the council. And I think that changes, that gives the community an opportunity to very much understand who their leaders are and how those leaders lead and what their thoughts are. And so I think it is an opportunity that should be shared. And last but not least on that, I think for districts, even more than at large, it gives each district council member, or each district that their council member serves in, the feeling of strength for that 1 year. They get the spotlight and the strength. Even though the mayor has no more power than any other council member, that district will feel that their district is a little more important, or the spotlight is more cast on them for 1 year. And that's nice. There's no reason we shouldn't be focusing on district to district to district, as well as honoring them all as a whole, or honoring the city as a whole. So for me, it's easy. I very much support 5 districts. In looking at the maps, which I know we're not talking about tonight, it makes more sense to me from the map models that I've seen so far. And sharing the position of mayor, although it's mostly ceremonial, I think makes sense, and it's good. It's good for the community, and I think it's good for the council. And I haven't heard any argument that makes sense against it so far, quite frankly. So that's where I'm headed. That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Coors?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I did have one question following up, not to get off topic on what happens if people run in districts, but typically the way districts are laid out, from what I remember from calls with the demographer, is north to south. Is that right?
Generally.
Okay, but there's flexibility. So for example, the city could pick the districts that are actually people are in or up, as opposed to to put up in 19 instead of the districts incumbents who aren't up till 21 or up.
I mean, that's going to be part of the detail work in the rollout.
Okay,
yeah.
Just because that's one way to look at it. I want to answer Mr. Finley's question about if the legislature was going to elect the governor or Congress was going to ask the president, without getting into any current politics. But
please do.
But the difference here is, in those cases, the people are electing the chief executive officer. In our city, the chief executive officer is the city manager. So the majority of cities, the vast majority our size, and that have a city manager council form of government, is a 5-member council with the mayor selected from within the council. It is a different situation. If we think about how we elect our county board of supervisors, we get to vote for one of the 5, and they pick who is the president of the board of supervisors. If we look at the school district, we elect one of 5. If we look at the Desert Healthcare District, we will be electing one of 5. Community College District. So for municipal government, where there's actually a professional who is a chief executive officer who's selected by the council, this is the way it is usually done. So I think it's a distinction from the other. That's not to say that people, of course, some people are going to feel they want to get to vote for every position. Absolutely understand that. But I think there's a distinction there. I just have a couple comments. I think we talked a lot at the meeting. I also want to echo the amazing job the working group did. I think, as Anthony said, it was over 600 hours of volunteer time and 16 meetings, and just very impressive and very appreciative that we have people that we do in the city who put that kind of time into working to improve our city. So thank you. For me, I think it's, there are lots of policy reasons that we could argue, but I think there are two main things. And to me, the main one is what is most consistent with the California Voter Rights Act? Because that's sort of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to comply with the California Voter Rights Act, and in the process, hopefully do a lot of good things in that transition. And the California Voting Rights Act prohibits use of at-large elections. And it doesn't say just some at-large elections, it's at-large elections if such elections result in racially polarized voting or impact the ability of minorities to elect candidates of their choice due to voter dilution, minority voter dilution. So if our goal is to comply, the only way to fully comply and to protect ourselves from a lawsuit entirely, as both the city attorney and our outside expert have said, is to go to 5 districts. So to do something that will leave us susceptible for a lawsuit doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's not as much compliant with the California Voter Rights Act. So that's sort of my first priority. The issue of the charters come up, and I just want to, as we look at the charter, no matter what we decide, it's not going to be entirely consistent with the charter, right? Right now, we have 5 members of the city council who are all elected at large. One of those members is the mayor, who's also elected at large. So that's going to change. We can change it by saying 4 will no longer be elected at large and 1 will, or 5 will no longer be elected at large and all will still be elected in the same manner, which is more consistent with the charter's co-equal members of council. Now, from a legal power authority, the mayor's position won't change either way because the mayor is a ceremonial mayor. But one of the concerns that the working group expressed and that I share is the perception that someone elected by the whole city will be seen as, by many, as having more power than people elected by 25% of the city, and the impact that could have. So those, to me, are sort of significant factors. And when we look at the maps that were submitted, and I think we have more than any other city has ever seen submitted from residents, so thank you, we appreciate that, it's pretty clear that there's more minority voter dilution with 4 districts than 5. And so that really weighs into this. And I also think 5 districts gives us a lot more flexibility in looking at communities of interest, looking at parks and community centers and major roadways and schools and the other factors than 4 districts will. So that's sort of the main focus I'm looking at this on, but I think there are a lot of policy reasons, and I think there are good arguments on both sides, and I appreciate the working group really sharing reasons they considered, but that they thought were important for 4 districts, but they didn't outweigh the 5 districts, and I appreciate you looking at both sides of that. So thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Who wants to speak next? Councilmember Holstage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've talked about this a lot. We had a meeting last week, so it feels a little repetitive, but I know a lot of people weren't there and aren't following it. And so just to echo my colleagues' comments, I agree. I think 5 districts with a rotating mayor is the right thing to do. I think that it's the only option that's fully consistent with the California Voting Rights Act. We have to remember that we are being sued. We got a demand letter saying that the at-large system that we use now, people voting at large for all of us and for the mayor, dilutes minority voters' votes, meaning that minority voters cannot pick and elect their candidates of choice. The California legislature has made a policy determination that city councils just should be districted. Actually, boards, elected boards should be districted. That's how our legislature works. In California, that's how Congress works. That's how most of our elected bodies work. And so it just, although I understand the concern that we're getting, some people are getting votes taken away because we can no longer vote for multiple council members and a mayor. Actually, other people are going to have a stronger vote because now we're going to have districts where it's a majority-minority district and people can actually elect who they want, and there's no voter dilution, which is illegal under the law. So I think that if we were to choose 4 districts with an at-large mayor, I've looked at this closely. It's a hard decision. It's complicated getting a demand letter like this and trying to figure out how our government should be. It's a big decision. But if we were to still have an at-large mayor, that would prevent people from diverse backgrounds, people who are not independently wealthy, who cannot fund their campaigns, who might not be able to raise $500,000, $250,000 to run for that position. It prevents people from running, and it dilutes minority votes. And I think that if we were to choose 4 districts with an at-large mayor, I think that directly conflicts with the California Voting Rights Act. I don't think it is consistent with our values as a city, which is standing up for the rights of all people and civil rights and being on the right side of civil rights. I think if we were to retain an at-large mayor, it would retain a lot of those problems that we still have. We were incorporated 1938. If I looked on the Wikipedia list of all of our mayors and our city council members since 1938, I know we've had different systems throughout that time, but we have had a history of historic inequality, segregation, and exclusion in our city, especially with Section 14, which I'm grateful for the working group for referencing that, because that has effects now on families and residents in our city now. And so we have a long way to go. And I think this starts the process of allowing people from marginalized communities to be involved in the city, to run for office, and to serve successfully. So I looked at that Wikipedia list since 1938. We've had 1 Black mayor. In all of that time, we've had no Latina mayors. We've had no female mayors. So having an at-large system, you can just see from the history, prevents certain people from running and winning that seat. It is exclusionary. Making sure I make all my points. It's hard because we haven't really discussed this in depth together as a community. So I just have a few questions, or 1 or 2. When we're deciding how to rotate mayor, if we decide that today, when are we going to decide that? So the working group gave us recommendations about self-selecting or voting or rotating, those types of models. So when in our system of process are we going to decide that?
I'm going to defer to the subcommittee. I think that's something that was specifically contemplated when the process was mapped out.
Are we voting on that tonight?
The rotation of the mayorship? No, you're not.
Just
4 or 5. And by the way, the reason that's so essential is we really have to get to these meetings involving maps.
We do not have to make a decision as to what the process is going to be for a rotation this evening. That's not on the agenda for this evening. It is something that there are many alternative methods, some quite subtle, and I recommend that we defer that decision until we can set it up in such a way that we are truly examining all of the options, and the community is also aware of all of the options that we have. I think we need to do that sometime before the end of this year, just in terms of making it clear to the public. But as I understand it, we don't absolutely have to make that decision until November of 2019.
You could kick the can down the road if you wish.
I don't want to kick it that far, but
We don't have to do it tonight.
The one thing I would add, though, to Councilmember Holstage's question that I think is essential, we would not recommend that you incorporate in the ordinance by which you establish these districts that system. In fact, typically speaking, with respect to good government that I know Mr. Priest has seen elsewhere and I have seen elsewhere, the policy that a council chooses to pursue with respect to this is adopted most typically, I'm not saying never by ordinance, but usually it's by resolution, to the extent that councils may have different views on these sorts of things, and you may not wish to codify that process. You may wish to have it be a little bit more hands-on for the council.
Thank you. So I would agree with Councilmember Middleton that we don't have enough information about all the different options and recommendations for the way to do that. But I do support having 5 districts from all of the reasons really that the working group laid out. I thought that was an excellent report, and we're really grateful for your service. I didn't know until reading this report that you were meeting every single week and hosting and putting on all of these events and having long sessions. It's just incredible the amount of work that you've done on this, and we're so lucky to have just really the best people working for our city and doing this work. It's just incredible the type of people that we have in our community who are involved and getting involved. And I know we have a lot more out there that we still want to get involved, and we still want those voices, and your work will allow us to do that. I only have one other specific question, which was asked by a member of the public, is if we could have an overlay map of the 1PS neighborhoods on some of those maps. So I know we have a separate 1PS neighborhood map, but maybe as we're moving forward in the process, we could actually do some overlays of some of the main ones that we pick so that people can really make sure that their neighborhoods are together. And that's all I have to say. It's interesting. I do think that we need more diversity up here. It's hard to do this job as a working person. It's often hard. All of us at one time in our lives have felt like we're the only one like us in a room or on a board, and that's really hard for our residents, and people need to see themselves up here. So I think 5 districts with a rotating mayor will share that power with the whole community and allow new voices to shine through. Thank you.
Councilmember Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to repeat a few things that have been said already, but there's no way not to repeat a few of the things, beginning with incredible admiration and appreciation for the working group and what they did in terms of work product and laying out the issues and reaching out to the community. All of us that are up here on the dais have run citywide. We have reached out to communities all over to try to get votes, and to ultimately we were successful. We're sitting here. But one of the things that we certainly know from running for office is we did not, for the most part, see the entire community of Palm Springs present at so many of the campaign events that we went to on the trail. And as I think back upon the individuals that I encountered and love in my own campaign, and compare that to what we saw at the various outreach programs, there were definitely differences in those audiences in the outreach programs. And that was more reflective of the full community that we have here in Palm Springs. And we are involved in this because it is a civil rights issue. This is not just simply, there's an attorney who filed something and now we've got a lawsuit and we have to deal with it. This is a matter of civil rights. And one of the things that I've reflected back on as we talk about civil rights, and frankly talking about it in terms of whether or not we vote on civil rights, was one of my earliest memories as a 12-year-old in 1964. At the end of the campaign, my father took me to a huge rally that Hubert Humphrey was speaking at. It was mostly labor, mostly folks from East Los Angeles. Then Senator Humphrey was getting enthusiastic applause from all over the crowd. He's a good speaker. At the end of his speech, he said, "Vote no on the Rumford Fair Housing repeal." And he was drowned out in that Democratic crowd with boos. And the fair housing law in California was overturned in 1964 by a public vote that was 2-1. Fast forward to 1994, and we get to Prop 187. Fast forward again to 2008. The same year that we elected Barack Obama President of the United States. In California, 52% of our citizens said, "I do not have a right to marry the person I love." Ultimately, the courts overturned each and every one of those decisions. We are here to deal with a civil rights issue, and in our city, when we start looking at maps, one of the reasons that so many of our African-American neighbors are in the Desert Highland and Lawrence Crosley neighborhood is that they were run out of where they were living before. So many of the Filipino and Latino neighbors were run out of where they were living before. We are dealing with some of the residue left over from those days. And by moving to 5 districts, we create the greatest opportunity for us to allow those communities to represent someone who looks like them. And as each and every one of us who has ever looked at a dais that includes no one who looks like you knows it makes a difference when you see someone who is like you. Mr. Doobie identified very clearly 5 maps gets us with citizens of voting age population to at least one district that's almost 50-50 and 2 other districts that are right at 25%. We need to not diminish the ability of minority voters to represent themselves, and going to 5 does that. I've also heard from different individuals that the mayor is the chief executive of the city. That is simply not the case in Palm Springs. It is the case in many places. All of us remember that Mayor Daley got things done. I grew up in Los Angeles, and for a number of years, Tom Bradley was the mayor of Los Angeles and was an incredible symbol for our city. But whether it's Mayor Daley, Mayor Bradley, LaGuardia, de Blasio, Michael Bloomberg, all of the legendary mayors, they were the chief executives of their city. They were the executives. The city council was the legislature. In our system of checks and balances, the city council acts as a legislative body. The city manager acts as the executive. The council are legislators. The city manager is the individual who runs the city and reports to each and every one of us. I think this is the most appropriate form of government moving forward and will best represent all of the people of our city.
Thank you, Councilmember Middleton. I'd like to certainly thank the subcommittee for all the extraordinary work they did, and also the city clerk who's worked very hard on this, and the city manager and his staff, and the working group is phenomenal. And I've been really studying this issue very, very hard, and I really, last week was the meeting, the special meeting with the working group was extremely educational, and I had read the report several times and really digested it. And I will admit it changed my thinking a lot, because when we first started out last March, when we found out about this, I thought the only reason I went along with it and voted for it was because I felt we had a gun to our head. But since then, I've come to realize, and by listening to everyone, that going to districts will probably help more people be fairly represented in the city. One thing that's bothered me very deeply, though, is especially last week listening, and even tonight, is the description of our city as being so extremely racist and divided. I don't think that's true. I think this is the least racist. There's racism everywhere, and prejudice everywhere. And it's going to be a long, I don't think we'll see that go away in our lifetimes. But I think Palm Springs is one of the least racist places I've ever lived. I've lived in Washington, D.C. for a long time. This is certainly a lot less racist than Washington, D.C. was. And I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1950s and the 1960s, and you don't get more racist than that. So Palm Springs to me is is a wonderful place to live, because, like I said, obviously there is going to be some racism, but I think we are the least racist place I've ever seen. However, that being said, I really, I think it's really important that, we recognize the rights of the minorities and give minorities a chance to be represented. But I also think we need to represent and be concerned about the majority. And in the city in Palm Springs, I mean, people compare us to this city, that city. And in Sausalito, Mayor Pro Tem, when you were rotated, was that you were directly elected, or were you districts? So everyone had voted in the city had selected you to be on there. Okay, I didn't know, you'd not mentioned that before, so I was just asking. But 36 years ago, the majority of people in Palm Springs voted to make the mayor a directly elected position, starting out with Mayor Bogart the second time he ran. And 24 years ago, the city, by a majority again, voted for our city charter, which again had a directly elected mayor. And I don't, I really don't believe, like so many people have said, it's because people here don't think of the mayor as the CEO. People who know better, and they watch our meetings. They see it's if you can count to 3, that's how it works. The mayor doesn't have any veto power, any special power or anything. But people in Palm Springs, we're different. We're not Cathedral City. We're not Rancho Mirage. We are one of the most recognized small cities in California. We are a unique personality. We have a very vibrant and involved city, and people in the city have an image they want to maintain of the city, and they want to elect who is going to be that figurehead, that representative, that person who shows up, that cuts ribbons, who does presentations. I think they want to do it. So I think we should, I personally cannot support 5 districts and a rotated mayor. Last week, our city attorney said that he felt that, and correct me if I misquote you, that we could he could sell to the people who are suing us the 4 districts and a directly elected mayor. You could probably sell it.
I don't know if I'd put it exactly that way, but
you could probably sell it.
I think it's compliant with the law, and I think it's something that if the council decides, we can work and move forward.
And I believe you also said that you had not seen, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, you had not seen evidence of racially polarized voting.
I made the comment that I'm not willing to concede that there's racially polarized voting. I'm not going to offer my opinion. My opinion is irrelevant.
But we don't have no blatant evidence of it.
I'm sorry?
So you haven't seen any blatant evidence of it?
The demography that's been done, that's been available, I think, as a matter of public record. It's been discussed in public. It's been the subject of some discussion by the working group to the extent that no, I'm seeing a no nod.
It hasn't, but as far as I know, not that I would object to it and I'd vote to make it public, but you asked us not to do that.
No,
so you said litigation reasons we shouldn't release it. So
thank you.
Clearly you shouldn't. I'm fine if we do, though.
No, I think that as a practical matter.
I was just pointing at that I was listening and,
no,
and I heard these things.
I appreciate that, and I apologize for misspeaking.
In summary, and I'm not going to sit here and talk for 20 minutes. In summary, I think, I've really changed my position in, it's not just a gun to my head anymore because we're going to be sued for millions of dollars if we don't do it. I think, having districts is going to be a good thing in the long run. But I don't see that much difference between 4 districts and 5 districts. And I really think in the city of Palm Springs, the vast majority of the people, although we've heard for 300 or 400 people, I've been to probably 8, and I didn't know. I've been trying to learn. I went to, like 8 of the public meetings. I went to 2 of the training sessions. I've listened to everything. I've gone to everything I could to try to learn about this, but I have not been convinced that the majority of the people, we've seen, the city clerk said 400 people, but a lot of those people have been the same people, maybe counted twice, because a lot of people went to multiple meetings. So, but there's a lot more people than that in Palm Springs. I personally do not feel that the majority of the people in Palm Springs want to rotate the mayor amongst the city council members who are voted by districts, because then anyone who's sitting in the representative seat, the figurehead seat, has not been elected by all the people of Palm Springs. To represent all the people of Palm Springs, they've been elected by one district. So, I've tried, I've listened, I've changed a lot, but I haven't changed far enough to give our working group what they want, which is a unanimous decision. I just, in my heart, I have to vote what I think and what I have observed, and I've changed, but I haven't changed that much. So I support the districts, but I don't support 5 districts and a rotating mayor. Here we go. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to clarify something. I know that we're not going through the weeds tonight and the mechanics of how the mayor will be elected by council. I do want to get clarification on one issue, though, with respect to that. We're using the term rotating. So that term, to me, is a misnomer from what I understand we're moving toward. In the other city I served, we didn't necessarily rotate. The mayor was elected by the council. And I want to make it clear now, ahead of time, that that is what I support, because what I found in my prior experience was that, A, not everybody wants to be mayor, and in some cases, some people shouldn't be mayor because the mayor is the speaker. And that requires a certain talent that not everybody has, quite frankly. So I just wanted clarification on that word. I don't know if that word has a legal meaning or something specific, but I don't want to mislead the community when we use terms like that.
I think it's probably fair to say, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, I'd love you to respond. Thank you.
I think it's fair to refer to that person as a council elected or council chosen mayor, whatever process that would be, as opposed to rotating, because you're right. I mean, rotating connotes it's just sort of an automatic thing.
Well, in my head, and this is in my head, it suggests that everybody who is seated on the dais will eventually be mayor, and that's not often the case.
There are cities that do actually rotate, Mayor Pro Tem Roberts, but there are plenty of cities that select the mayor exactly as you've described. That'll be a political choice for the city council to determine via resolution, as I tried to explain.
And I understand that's down the line. I just wanted to get that clarification for the community. Thank you.
Councilmember Coors.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I appreciate your comments and coming to so many of the meetings. And I guess my experience from going to those meetings was different. I walked away somewhat surprised and really had to look at myself at the amount of racism I saw in some of those meetings and some of the comments that were made and the stories of people and the racism they experienced. Are we less racist than many other cities? I'm sure we are. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I'm not saying you said that. I think it's really important to point out. I think this process was, for me, going to those meetings was really powerful. And it was a really important learning experience for me. You know, I get your point that the voters voted for a directly elected at-large mayor. They also voted for all directly elected at-large council members. So if we're gonna keep an at-large element, we might as well keep it all. I mean, why should one position stay the way it was and 4 others become 25%? So if it's what's so important is what the majority of the voters wanted, then why support only keeping the mayor at large instead of all council members at large. That doesn't make sense to me. I also think and know that when it comes to district elections in the CVRA, if the voters vote, as one city did, to not go to districts, the judge will respond, I don't care. The law doesn't give you that right. And in fact, if the results of that election, when it's broken down, show racially polarized voting in that citywide election, that could be evidence in a lawsuit against the city. So that would be a poor way to move forward when we could do something that is beneficial, more consistent with the CVRA, and avoid litigation. There are a handful, I think you said 4 last time, of cities that the same plaintiff's attorney has sent demand letters to that have kept 4 and a mayor, and he has not sued them.
Correct.
But they could be sued by anyone tomorrow.
Yeah, that's just Mr. Shankman.
Right.
That's not anybody else.
Right. So it doesn't protect us. It just means as that group is going through cities to move to districts, that's not their main focus right now. But it keeps an at-large element, which is what the CVRA says you shouldn't have. And the only other thing is we adopted unanimously, before we saw maps, before we knew what districts might look like, how minority voter dilution might happen, we all agreed to the criteria we would use in making this decision. And one was to maximize the goals of the California Voting Rights Act. And I actually thought, and actually said at meetings, that 4 districts might do that better. It might give us more flexibility in drawing bigger districts that might give us better representation. I said I was open to that. I really want to understand what maps look like, how they impacted communities' interest, you know, how they impacted minority voter dilution, and other factors. So before we knew, we all said that. So I think it's important to be consistent with what we said, even if we may not like the outcome. So to me, this is consistent with the goals, consistent with the CVRA. I understand both sides on this argument, but I'm going to support this for that reason.
Councilmember Holstage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to respond as well and urge the mayor to do a unanimous decision on this for the reasons that our working group put forward, that we're making a strong, we're sending a strong message to the entire community about where people fit in, the role of the mayor in our city government, the role of council, our relationships between each other. We've gotten advice from our city attorney, our special counsel, who's an expert on this issue, that the point is that at-large elections violate the California Voting Rights Act, and that if we maintain an at-large mayor, it violates, and it could violate and lead us to legal liability and risk of being sued at any time for having that at-large position. And we also got advice that an at-large mayor with districted council members is less consistent with our charter, because our charter sets forth, which our charter is the constitution for our city, and we have to follow that above everything else, for our city at least, and that does co-equal members on city council. The mayor's role is really important. I know that that's important to the people of Palm Springs. We want a good spokesperson. We are a national brand. We are a world-class city, or like no place else. We want someone who can represent our values, and that's really important to the people of Palm Springs. So I agree, but I think that having a separately elected at-large mayor is just too inconsistent with the California Voting Rights Act, which we agreed that that would be our main driving principle, and it's inconsistent with our charter. It sets up all kinds of complications and problems in the relationship on council, in the public. I went to nearly all of those meetings, and I continually heard people's confusion about how our government works, thinking that the mayor is the CEO, that he runs the whole city, and that's not true. And the mayor is an important role in our city, but it leads to more confusion, and that's what the working group said, is having one person set apart is just confusing for the people. It's confusing for council. If you think about elections and how people are elected in districts, allowing the mayor to run at large and have a huge amount of influence over all of the districts, all of the residents, all of the businesses, all of the special interests who donate to elections and who get candidates elected, that would allow even larger than life authority and power over the whole city and over fellow council members who are co-equal in our form of government and in our charter. We've had issues in the past, alleged issues that we're facing with our former mayor, that we've had mayors who were larger than life and felt that they were above others and could exert a lot of influence. That's what we want to avoid. We're a city that we stand for transparency, and we want to make sure that the people elect the people in power, and that there isn't confusion over who can do what, who runs the city. And so, I strongly believe in looking at this, and I take it very seriously. My husband's third generation Palm Springs. I know a lot of old school Palm Springs people like that, having that mayor who's a spokesperson. But I actually think we can do that better as with a mayor selected by the city council. I agree with our mayor pro tem. I don't think everyone wants to be mayor. I think it's actually a ton of work for one person to do for 4 years. That's just a long time to be going to every single grand opening, every single event. It's a lot of work when you also have the work of the legislative body as well. And so I think it just makes more sense. And I do think it's really important to have a consistent message that we're telling our community about our values and about how our government works, to have a unified message and a unanimous voice. And just really quickly, because I do have to comment about the racism. And I think some of the point of having this discussion is that no one up here can be an expert on racism and what racism exists in our communities. I've worked hard to talk to people about racism in our communities. I've lived all over as well. I lived in Palo Alto, and I worked in East Palo Alto. I went to school in Santa Barbara, and I lived in unincorporated areas, and I've really seen a lot of segregation and other issues and inequality, and I see it here too. And the point is that we have 400 people who've been involved in this process. Nearly every single, I read this whole packet, all of the comments that we've received, except for a few, they've all been supportive of 5 districts with a rotating or council-elected mayor. And so that's what I believe the people of Palm Springs want. I think it's what's right and actually just follows the law. And so I think that we should follow the law tonight and stand up. And that's why we need those voices involved to tell us about their experiences, so that we know what exists in the community and we can have those voices making those decisions. Thank you.
Councilmember Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be brief. We've gotten to the point to where we've got a motion and a second. But I do want to pick up on the racism and a couple of other points. I moved to Palm Springs because I knew it was going to be an inclusive community. And I think that applies to absolutely all 5 of us who are sitting up here. We all moved to this city knowing the kind of values that we were going to see when we got here. So I'm very proud to call myself a resident of Palm Springs. Do we have the racism today that we saw when Section 14 was burned? No. But we still have some of the residue from those days left in our communities. And what we are doing here tonight is trying to help mitigate some of that leftover residue that is within our community. Do we have the kind of racism in our community that all of us have experienced at different times in our lives? No. But we know from having attended the community outreach programs that it still exists within our community. And that's something that we want, that is inconsistent with Palm Springs values. Second point, and then I will get to my last question. One of the values that we identified right at the very beginning of this process is the best interest of the city as a whole is the responsibility of each and every person who is elected. We are going to make good on that value by enacting, as we move forward, rules, processes, customs, procedures, traditions that make it clear people are expected when they sit up here to put the interests of the city as a whole first. They still will have to represent districts. And will we at some point in time, somewhere, get someone who could care less about the rest of the city? I'm just here for my district. It will likely happen. But I think that person will find themselves very much in a minority. My last thing that I want to say is a question, and this goes to either Mr. Kotkin or Mr. Priest. Does 4 plus an at-large mayor or 5 districts, which one of those two best conforms with our current charter?
I think I'll take that one. And I had a very good discussion with Mr. Priest. The popular word now is robust. And as the city attorney in-house, which is a decision that this council made a short time ago, I look at the charter not only as a static, legal, principled document. I look at it as a living, breathing document that you all conform your activities to. And from my vantage point, the letter of the charter is conformed with, but perhaps more importantly in certain respects, the spirit of the charter, which is the notion that I think I heard Councilmember Coors speak very directly to regarding the notion that you're all coming from the same place, serving the people, and the very clear language in the charter pointing to the distinction with respect to the mayor being simply limited to spokesperson and ceremonial duties. From my vantage point, and I've expressed this for some time now, the 4+1 is less consistent with the charter. That's not to say that it wouldn't, to the mayor's point a short time ago, work out and be something that legally would float. But as a practical matter, if you're asking me what's more consistent, no question, the 5-district model.
Thank you, Mr. Kotkin. That concludes my remarks.
Okay, motions to approve has been made by Councilmember Coors, seconded by Councilmember Middleton. Motion is on the floor.
And just for the record, the motion to approve is the recommendation of the CVRA working group and the recommendation of the subcommittee. Recommendations do match in substance, I know. The recommendation from the subcommittee and from the working group is to adopt a 5-by district with a mayor selected from the city council electoral system. You're welcome.
Motion passes 4-1.
Okay, next item on the agenda is adjournment. Okay, the city council will adjourn.
Adjourn, if we could have a minute as the subcommittee to give some options for council as we move forward to the next meeting that we have.
Okay.
Currently, we have over 40 maps, 8 that have been developed by the demographer, and well over 30, I think the last number was 36 that have come from the public, 36 or 38. Okay. So At the next special CVRA meeting, which is scheduled for October 18, we are to move from this over 40 maps down to 3, 4, or 5 maps. What the subcommittee is recommending is that each one of us as members of the council review all of the maps, take a look at which ones you tend to like, which ones you don't, come and listen at the next meeting that is dedicated to this subject. But at the end of that meeting, we need to get down to a small number of maps. And our suggestion is that at the end of the October 18 meeting, each member of City Council be responsible to identify one map that they believe is the most effective map going forward. That means we could end up at that time having 5 maps that have been selected for consideration, or something less than that if multiple members of City Council choose the same map. But during the time between October 18 and November 15, we need to have a small number of maps that we can spend a great amount of time meeting and interacting with the community. And we can only do that if we have a process on October 18 to get down to that, that final finalist list of maps.
Yeah, so that was just, I don't know if we can decide that tonight. It was just an idea, but which...
We have an agendized action, but we'll take that as direction to staff, certainly, absent objection by other council members, and we'll move forward with that agenda for the 18th.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just comment on that
Councilmember
quickly,
Holston?
Mr. Mayor? Thank you. So that means that we really need comments from the public from now until the 18th when we have that meeting about which maps are your preference. So I would really like that from the public. We're here to represent you know, what the public wants from us in maps. And so I would really encourage the working group, members of the public, people who are interested to send us your top 3 or top 5 maps that you prefer, and then we'll look at those and bring those forward. Do you have a comment, question? A member of our working group, Tobias Wolff.
Helpful to specify that you all would like to get input about which maps, but also why, so that you know what the decision factors are that members of the community are prioritizing most highly.
Yes, thank you. Good point. Thank you.
One process question. If we're very efficient and we get this done and we have the public hearings, I know we're scheduled to vote on the ordinance on the second meeting in December. Is can we actually finish the first meeting in December if we get all the work done, or do we have to go to the second meeting in December? I was just wondering for...
I will say this: we could only adopt an actual ordinance at a regular meeting.
I know,
right now,
but right now it's scheduled for the second meeting of
correct.
December.
That is correct. We were scheduled to introduce the ordinance on December 5th and adopt it on December 19th.
Okay, so that's firm.
It'd be hard.
It's up to the council. We work at your pleasure.
I mean, I guess if we got down to one map in 2 weeks, if we all agreed on the map in 2 weeks, it could move up. Right? Because it would take but we still need to have 2 hearings on the maps.
We will take your direction. You will decide.
Yeah, so we'll work with the clerk on whether
I'm just saying, I just sort of feel it'd be if we could get a little ahead of the curve, it might be good, because if some glitch comes up or we have a problem, we're pushing ourselves up to the 19th of December is really last minute.
I think it's a really good idea on the mayor's part. If we can streamline, I agree, to give ourselves a little cushion in case. So if we could shoot for that first meeting in December, and if we can't make it, we can't make it, but let's try for that.
Yeah, so we'll go over the list with the clerk and city attorney and be able and report back at the next meeting.
Because I've seen us sometimes get into complications that pushes it off a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else from anyone? Seeing none, we will adjourn to the special meeting on Tuesday, October the 16th, 2018 at 6:00 p.m., Council Chamber, City Hall.